Good morning everybody, welcome to the show today. Got some interesting stuff happening today. There were a couple of questions last week that I have to answer, and I thought I'll answer them with a task, you might say. So, the big question after drilling the holes last week in our little box was, does it fit? Because if you remember rightly, I showed you a box last week that actually didn't fit together. So today we're going to repair that, and I'll set that up before we see if this one fits. So the question is going to stay begging for a little while. Suspense, suspense, that's one of it. Yeah, anyway, so hopefully we're going to end up with that and like that, and this one is going to look like that. But before we do that, Skip asked a question last week that I thought I'd answer with a task. Skip asked last week, was the, let's shift all this stuff out of the way, was the sheet on the sanding board one piece? Okay, so that's what we worked with last week when I sanded the cut-off lid. So Skip, this is for you. I'll show you how I built it. So, bit of glue, baking paper, 2 pieces of MDF, and a whole sheet of, this one's dry cut sandpaper, and I'm just going to glue that in place. Now, some of you have probably seen this, or you've done it yourselves, but this is how I made these ones. So, a bit of glue, put a reasonable amount on. You can thin it down if you like, make it a little bit thinner, but you need to make sure that the whole sheet is covered. Otherwise the edges sit up, and you don't want any lumps. So we spread it out nice and evenly, like so. So we've got to come right to the edges of that piece of MDF. Now the MDF can be any size. It's not a critical thing. It can be, but if the thicker bit would probably be better. That way it won't warp on you. And you don't want it to warp, because when it's warped, it's not flat anymore. Bit of fur in there. So nice even spread of material, of glue. Just make sure you don't have any lumpy bits in there. You don't want that on the job. Now it's just a full sheet. This is 100 grit. Just lay it on there so it's nice and flat. Now, baking paper. I put a piece of baking paper on there, about the right size. Doesn't want to tear. And then I'll get my second piece of MDF, sit it on top, and then clamp the whole thing together. Now you can put as many clamps on as you like. So I might put a couple more on the in the middle.
Is that to be sure, to be sure?
To be sure, to be sure. Just to make sure that we get it all glued up nice and tight. Okay, so that's going to squeeze the whole lot together. And then we just put that aside to dry, and I'll probably leave that for a whole day like that. Okay, so just let it dry. So that will go and just park down there out of the way, and then we'll get on with the next part of our job. So pretty easy. Skip, if you're watching, that's a pretty easy little task. So now, the job we were going to do. Now, if you remember rightly, when I showed you last week, this box was skewed off a little bit when I put the hinges in there. And part of the reason for that, or the reason that happened, was that this hole is not in the right place. So it's either too far forward or too far back. So it doesn't actually match up properly with this one here. So what we have to do is we have to repair those two holes. Now I'm going to do both holes, not just one, but I'm going to do both holes so that when I re-drill, I get them both in the right place. So what I've done is on the lathe, I turned down a little spigot. Now, this is 5mm diameter. Now, I could go and try and find dowel. I doubt you would. At 5mm, you probably wouldn't find too much of that around. You have to generally make it. And what I've done is I've made it from the same material as the box. Okay, so it's a piece of silver ash. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in the hole. Now, the important thing to remember here is that this needs to be parallel. It needs to be perfectly parallel so that it runs down the whole side and the whole of the side edges of the hole. So it has to fill in there. What we could do is we could score it a little bit with a knife, okay, just along there. So just allow the air to come out as you push this thing in, or the glue. We're going to use super glue. We're not going to use PVA. Now, the reason we're going to use super glue is because super glue, it dries a little, dries very, very clear, but it also soaks in to the surfaces around it a little quicker and a little easier than a glue that generally sits on the surface like the Titebond. So what we'll do is we'll put a couple of pieces in there. If it doesn't fit perfectly, make it fit. Now I've turned it down to 5mm, and I do know that it fits quite well, but I don't want to put too much pressure on the sides of the hole. So I'm just going to sand a little bit off.
It is very tight, isn't it?
I want to keep it as tight as I can without, I'm just turning that in my fingers like so as I'm just turning it like that as I sand so that I'm getting the whole surface. Little piece of 240. And I can feel that going in quite nicely. You can see that it's quite tight. Just a little bit more off it. Just rotate that round. Now the reason I'm starting this now is because I want to at least try, I may be able to by the end of the lesson, or end of the session I should say, lesson, I'm back in class. The end of the session we'll be able to trim it up and make it look like the rest of the box, and I'll show you what it looks like then. So that's actually fitting quite nicely.
Cole, this is a good way to show box makers that they can correct a mistake on the same box without throwing it in the corner if they get it wrong.
Yeah, that's a very good point that Pam made. If you heard that, she said that this is a good way of repairing a box or bringing back to life something that you may have made an error with, instead of just chucking it in a corner. So, and she's quite correct. You can rectify, you can bring it back. It may not be a saleable item, but it will be something that you could probably give to somebody as a gift, knowing that it's not exactly perfect because of that error. So now we have that right. So the super glue, actually, just want to tap that in. There is some in there. Okay, so super glue doesn't take very long to dry. It's relatively quick. As you can see, it's quite clear. And it's going to expand a little bit. And that's right to the bottom. So that's in quite nicely. Now I'm going to leave the excess glue sitting up there. I want that to actually stay there. So get a cutting board. Now I'm going to cut it off so that it sits up a little bit, because I want to trim it off later. And I want another piece for the other hole. Okay, so that's one. Now what you'll find on the end of here, we now have a furry edge, and that will sort of stop it from going into the hole. So again, just sand off the edges and put a tiny little chamfer on there just with the sandpaper. It takes away the burrs and the furs. And then our second one, you'll notice on this one here and this one here, I've marked the hole, because if you sit them down like that and you go, oh yeah, that hole at the end of there, yeah, so that one there, is the wrong hole. Because you remember they do go together this way. Again, fit before you. I haven't put, as you can see, I haven't put a whole lot of glue in there. I've put sufficient in there. You need to have good support with the glue, because we're going to re-drill that hole, remember? So that one can go in there like that. Just give that a little tap. Make sure it's all the way to the bottom of the hole. Now you also remember that we're going to cut, when we cut the hole, we re-drill the hole, we've got to go the full depth. So we may even, if one of these holes is in the correct place, drill out what we've just put in there. Okay, so now I have both of those holes repaired with material that's the same as the box. So make sure that happens, unless you want to make a feature of it, of course. But I wouldn't make a feature of an error. So I'm just going to sit that aside to dry. I have made a feature of an error, but not when I'm going to re-drill. So
tell me about what the blade is.
This is a pull saw. This is quite a nice little saw from Japanese Tools. A flush cut, 180 millimeters long.
Very nice.
And as you can see, you can replace the blade if you need to. So it's a flush cut, and the reason it's a flush cut is because you can actually bend it. So if you want to hold it flat and flush, it doesn't have a kerf on it. Okay?
Terrific.
Nice little saw. And as you can see, this one's had a fair bit of work, so it's starting to get a bit to the stage where I might have to replace it. Okay, now to answer the question. Where is the box? This is the big question. Will it fit? So as you can see, I've drilled all the holes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to test to see if it fits, but not with the hinges that are going to end up in there. They're the two hinges that are going to end up in it. All right, nice little brass ones. So I've got some of these little cheap and nasty tiny little hinges. They're the same diameter. They're much smaller, but because they're much cheaper, I don't want to damage one of those if it doesn't go together properly. So I'd rather damage a cheaper hinge than an expensive one. So we'll put that in there. Now, we're not going to hinge it, it's not going to open. This is just to see if the holes line up. So they fit in quite nicely. Could you get that any better?
Turn it round to the hinge side.
The hinges are on the back.
Yep.
And you can see that fits spot on perfect. Aussie, you know what an error is. An error is, we just pull these out, an opportunity to redesign.
That's all rubbish. You don't think that when you've made the mistake.
Yep. Anyhow, so we know the box fits. Now what we need to do is I need to be able to allow it to, or get it to open. So I need to have it open at 45 degrees. So therefore what we're going to do here is I'm going to chamfer off the back edge of both of those, right? So that we get this result. You can see there's a 45-degree angle there, but I need to keep it nice and sharp. Okay, so I don't want to round over into the ends of the box. I just want to keep it nice and sharp to the corners. So we have a task, a technique that we do with that. And this is what we do. You need to chamfer right to the center of the hole. Basically because your pivot point is going to sit in the center of the hole. All right? So when it sits in there, your pivot point is in the middle of the hinge. So therefore we've got to go to the middle. And even if you go a little bit further than the middle, that's okay, but you don't want to go too far. So the router bit we're going to use for that is the chamfer bit that we sell in our kit. Now, the chamfer bit, you can get lots of different chamfer bits. We've had it redesigned so that it's down to 30 millimeters. Normally they're up around 35, 36 mil. It's designed so that it will fit down through the whole of the table that we make. Okay. So it has to be redesigned, had to be reconfigured to actually be at 30 millimeters, because you can imagine the wider that is, the higher the angle, the shorter the angle. To get it at 45 degrees, you have to organise the angle of the cutter. So redesigning it was the only answer, and so that's what we have there. Okay, now, ruler, pencil, and make sure your pencil is sharp on this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to, a piece of material is 8 millimeters. Let's have a look at the hole. The hole is a little bit towards the center of the box. So we've got say 3 millimeters. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. We'll take that to 4. So if we measure to 4, make it accurate. We only have to do this once. I'll do the same on the other end. And we'll draw a line down through the middle. I could set a marking gauge at that if I wanted to, but I'm not going to because I don't want a scribe mark there. So down through the middle, you can see where it meets here on the corner and here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a 45-degree angle off there. All right, so we need to set that up so that on the router, that's all we take off. And to adjust that, all we need to do is adjust the height. Okay. So that's not bad. Okay, it's probably a little under what we want, but I can readjust that in a second. Now, if I just went straight onto that router bit, what would happen is it would round over this corner, and then if you come off, you'll end up, if you don't come off properly, you'll end up going around the corner there. One of the other things that you're going to have here is because you have the end of the piece of timber showing on the end there, if I cut all the way along here, I may end up getting tear out on there. All right, so we've got to avoid that as well. So there are a couple of things that we have to think about. The easiest way I've found to do it is to use a fence. So I'll just turn my table around so Pam can get at it. So put a fence in. Now what we want is we want this side of the bearing here. So if you can come around here, Pammy. We want this side of the bearing to be flush with the edge of the fence. So this is the way I do it. I put a ruler on the bearing, edge of the bearing, and then I run the fence up to the ruler. Okay, and then clamp it in place. I used all my shorter clamps on the, so there we have our piece. Now I've got a piece of MDF here, and what I'm going to do is just going to do a little test cut. Okay, so just want to make sure of it first, and then we'll use our do the box. So earmuffs everybody, and I just have to go and get a pair. So hang tight there. So earmuffs on everybody. Okay, so where's our markings? There they are. So what I need to make sure is that we're not going to take too much off. And that looks pretty close to me. Actually, it might even take a little bit more off. You can see the top edge of the line actually lines up with the centre line of that once you sort of sit it there. I might take a little bit more off. So that's a matter of raising the route a little bit.
Just the tiniest bit.
Got to unlock it, silly. Okay, let's try that. So ears on. So that the tiniest little bit off. Let's have a look and see what that did. And I think that'll be pretty close to perfect. So I'm flush on the front of there and I'm flush here. And I'm sitting on my mark, and you can see that the top of that line, top of that chamfer is actually lined up with our mark. So now it's time to do the job. Now use that piece again. So to stop the blowout on the back edge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that along the fence there like so, but this piece is going to be my push block on the back. So it's just a movement across the piece of timber like that. And the fence is actually going to stop you from curling around the edges, and that's where we'll give it. Ears on. So that's come out pretty nice. Now the lid, exactly the same task. Use our piece of scrap again. Ears on. What you can do, just to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and make sure that you haven't got, because when you're looking at that you can't see the holes in it, is to put a mark on the top to make sure that that's the side you have to chamfer. Again, eliminating errors. So now we have our little box, and you can see the chamfer is pretty nice. It's nice and sharp, nice and clean, and that's the way we want it to be, so that when we put the hinges in, it's going to sit up on its edge like that, and that will look pretty spectacular, like so. If you take too much off, that's not a problem, but if you don't take enough off, the box is not going to open all the way to 45 degrees, or to 90 degrees. So just think about that when you're doing it. Okay, next task. If you notice with this box, you'll see that I've got rounded edges on various places, and I've got none on that. Now, if you want to leave that like that, that's fine. It's just a matter of gluing the hinges in and doing that. But before we actually glue the hinges in, just want to make sure that we dress the box up and make it look a little bit pretty. So with that, again, same thing. I'm going to keep that fence there. I'm going to round over the top edges of that, and then I'm going to add another little feature. I'm going to round over this part of here, not the feet, just the inside edges of our shadow line. Okay, so I'm going to round those over. I'll just show you how I go about that. Actually, I don't need the fence. I can do this without it because I've got to go all the way around the box. I might have to shorten that screw, I think. Okay. Now, for those of you who have our Ultimate Cutter Kit or our Master Cutter Kit, you probably have this router bit. Now rounding over bit. Okay, so the radius on that is a 1/4 of an inch, so quite small. Don't need a big one. Now what I want to do is I just want to round over the top edge just a tiny little bit. So when I set the height of my router bit, set it to the tip edge or the outside tip edge. That's the height of the router bit. So when I mean the outside tip edge, I mean this one here, if you come in under that one, is this tip here. Okay, so you've got your perfect curve there, and it'll be flat right on the edge of there, and so that should touch that surface there as it comes around. Now if you want to put a lip on there, just raise it up a little bit and you can use the outside edge of the cutting tooth. I don't want the lip, I just want to round it over. So ears on, everybody. Okay, so now I've got a nice little round over just there. You can see it burnt a little bit, but that's not to worry. That's easily sanded off. And I've got nice sharp corners on my feet. So when it sits there, I'll just clear some of that off the bench. When it sits there, you can see that now the box looks a little bit nicer than just that big square block that we had before. So now the litmus test, we're going to glue it together. Before, I'm not going to do it with this one, but normally I would get that there, I'd take the box and I would sand it up till it's ready for finish. But I sanded all the inside of the box before I started the job. So just got to remove that mark. Before I glue it in, I'm going to do a little test because I may have to reset and take a little bit more off the edge. It doesn't look like it's in the middle. So these are my hinges. Make sure that's at 90 degrees. Wow. Even I'm excited about that.
Oh, that's nice.
that came out quite nice. Okay, so what I need to do now is just glue those in place. And when you close it over, you can see that it's a perfect fit all the way around. Flush all the edges. I'm excited. Might not show it on the outside, but inside. Okay, so glue. Ooh, that's tight. Use my pliers, can't hang on to it. If you're pulling that out of there, just be very careful you don't snap off the pivot on the hinge. Okay. Get rid of some of this. Now, when I glue the hinges in, I use araldite. You'll see on the hinge itself, I don't know if you can see it on there, maybe on there, you can see it's got two little valleys on the top and the bottom, and that's to allow the glue to actually bind the hinge to the timber. So I use 5-minute araldite. So equal portions of araldite. Now 5 minutes gives you plenty of time to fit everything together. Just put the top back on. Stuff leaks all over the place. And we don't need a lot. Equal portions when it comes to this.
I'll talk to Ozzy about why you're gluing in the hinges even when they fit really tightly.
Okay, Ozzy, why do we glue the hinges in? The reason we glue the hinges in because your timber expands and contracts. Okay? The timber will expand and contract, and if you've got perfect 5mm holes, you'll find that when the timber contracts away from the hinge, the lid falls off. Does that explain everything, Ozzy? Okay, now be very careful you don't over glue, and make sure it's at 90 degrees as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself a piece of paper towel, and I just want to wipe away any excess that has squeezed out when I put that hinge in there. I could tape it, but the tape will give me a space between the two hinges, and I don't want that to happen when the box is closed, but I also don't want it to glue together on me. So just make sure you get the excess off, any excess that squeezes out.
Well, getting the hinge in at exactly 90 degrees is really integral to getting the lid straight, isn't it?
Correct, yeah. And that's why we're using 5-minute araldite, because it gives you a little bit of room of movement, a little bit of room to adjust as you go. So it doesn't dry up straight away. Just want to make sure I've got that at 90 degrees. Looks pretty close. Actually, pretty close is generally not good enough here. You have to have it perfect.
Would you put a square on that?
I could do. I could put a square on it.
Put the lark
The lark tool. Actually, the lark tool's a bit too big for it. You need something a little bit finer.
Okay.
Yeah. can do, use a tiny little square like this. That one's good. That one's good. I don't want things to stick just yet. Now a little bit more glue for the other one. You've got to do both these at the same time. Did Ozzy respond to my answer?
Yeah.
He's happy with that?
Yeah, I was happy with that.
As you can see, I didn't put a lot of glue on there, so don't overdo it.
All of that stuff will sand off, won't it?
Yes. Take a little bit of effort to get it off, but I'm trying to sort of make sure that I get as much as possible off there.
Yeah.
Carefully open that. Just make sure there's no glue in here. Bernard, give us a thumbs up if you think this little sessions that we're doing with these tiny hinges has given you has helped you, I should say. The okay, so we'll just sit that and let that dry. It's perfectly fitted, so
Open it up and turn it to it.
I'm not going to open it all the way, I'll just leave it open a little bit and you can see that it fits beautifully. Okay, so there's our little box with the hinges fitted. Our next box is going to be a trinket box, but I'm going to make it about the same size as this. So I'll make a really tiny small one so that you've got something a little different to my normal. All right, now I want to go back to, I'll just put that aside and just gently there. I want to go back to the repair. So that looks like it's dried pretty nicely. And as you can see, that's going to fit into there. So that's going to work. Well, I hope it does anyway. So let's get that sorted. Now where's my saw? Get a cramp and just cramp that to the bench. I had one here somewhere. There it is. Let's get back to my bench around here a little bit. Just going to cramp this to the bench so that it doesn't move while I'm cutting it. Sand that off. sandpaper. Piece of 240. I'll need some sort of sanding block. Now you can see the repair there. So when you look at that, you can see it's very flush. Like, it doesn't look it because you're looking at end grain for that little piece of timber that we put in there. I just need to do the same for the other one. Might take a little practice to actually get your sanding technique right for this. You've got to keep your piece of paper at the same angle as your 45. It takes a little practice. And you can see that one there is quite a nice one as well. Nice and flush. And now it's just a matter of re-drilling the holes. Now I've got 10 minutes, so we might actually do that. Now remember the other week we made a few of our drilling jigs. When I look at that, what I can see is that the drilling jig is right on that hole. So obviously that one was correct and this one wasn't. It's out a little bit on there, I can see. So I'm going to just re-drill. It's dry enough to drill. So let's go over to the drill press and we'll set that up. A couple of little clamps. A little bit of masking tape. Just get some stuff ready here. And I will need my 5mm drill bit. Always open that up the wrong way. Okay, so let's go over to the drill press here. Now remember we set the calipers. I've got to get another hinge. We set the calipers this is the task we did last week. We set the calipers, or the end of the caliper, to the centre of the pivot point, like so, and that gave us, well, it's 12.62mm. We took it out to 16mm. So if I extend that to an extra 3mm, now the 3 or 4mm was because of the thickness of our jig. Turn it up the right way, I should be able to get it better. Okay, lock that in. And then we set a piece of tape on our drill. At that size. That was my depth stop for the drill. Okay. Sure if I need that or not. May do.
You used it last week.
Did I use it last week?
You did, yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do here is just make sure that that's clamped into the right place. And what I've done is I've turned the box upside down onto its flat edge on the top of the drill press, and then sat that on top of it like so. And then I'm just going to clamp that in. Remember, we used these beaut little clamps last week and they worked a treat. Like so. I'll put a second one across the front. Now here's the other reason I repair both holes, even though one of them didn't really need it, is that when I drill this one and when I drill the other one, I know they're both going to be lined up. So that was the important thing to remember about that. That's actually moved, so I'm going to have to reset. Don't know why that moved, but it's right now. Okay, let's wind him up. I could leave this for another day or so before drilling, but I want to show you what actually happens. I'm just going very gently. Now when you look at this, you can see this hole was out, so if Pam can come in closer, you can see there's the edge of the piece that we added in, and it was only that far out, so it's not very much, tiniest little bit.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to see, but yeah.
Bit hard to see, but there is a tiny little bit there. So we'll set this one up again. Let's put it on the right way. Now, because we have an overlap here, we're going to have to do a little bit of adjustment or sit us on something. Piece of flat timber, like so. And that way it's not going to sit odd. Come up a little higher. You can see on this one as well, there's a tiny little bit of extra part of the plug that we put in there is actually still in there as well. So both holes were in the wrong place by the look of things. So now let's see if that fits. And we just have enough time before the end of the show to see if it fits. And I'm going to use my little tester ones as well. I don't want to use the proper ones just in case they damage. Do I fit it or do I wait for next week?
No. You'll be in trouble if you don't do it.
Ha! Guess what, folks? Spot on. Perfect. So that was a repair that needed to be done, and we've come up with a pretty good result. Now I can't actually open it because those hinges went pretty much all the way in. There we go. Pull that apart. Now it's just a matter of fitting hinges and going through the process that I did with the little box here. Okay, so that little box is now glued and dried, and it's a perfect little fit up. Okay, so that's it for today. We'll just pop you back to the main camera, and
Don't forget Dave.
yeah, don't forget Dave's show. I didn't look to see what he was doing today, but anyway, pop over and say good day to Dave. He'll probably have some more stories about his electric car, which he's all over at the moment. So yeah, but anyway, good show today, folks. I quite enjoyed it. I hope you did. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do, and we can get you some more bits and pieces. So next week, trinket box in a very small version with a different technique on how to hinge the box. So we'll be going through that one as well, and yeah, hopefully you'll get something out of it. So have a good week, everybody, and I will catch you all next Sunday.